Chris Newman, addressing spiritual and cultural literacy. This is going to be a very heavy-hitting presentation, and I'm going over a whole body of legislation, but I'm connecting it up to a very specific outcome. And I'm using examples which are drawn entirely from New Zealand, and what I'm doing is making a direct connection between collective activity and collective outcome, because what we do individually and what we go along with publicly and what we accept without objecting to it judges us. So, remember, some wise people once said the problem isn't that bad or evil things happen, it's that good people do nothing and just accept it and roll over. Spiritual and cultural literacy. When I grew up, New Zealand was called God's own. Whatever happened to God's own country? You might notice, those of us who've been around for long enough, that our beautiful nation, once called God's own country, is no longer referred to in those terms. Why? How? What? How is it that a nation that was once at the top of the world's statistics or comparative data, up there with Switzerland, regarded as a jewel in the South Pacific, God's own, the light of God shone on this country. How is it that that has been lost? Let's investigate. A series of public parliamentary acts condense or demonstrate exactly how it could be that God could turn his face away from this nation in shame at our misbehaviour. First, the Treaty of Waitangi Act, 1975, enshrined a blatant lie in statute. The Treaty of Waitangi Act said that the Freeman document is the treaty in English, and that is a demonstrable lie. It put the Parliament in fraud, race-based lies that disrespect father and mother, because it created the statutory Maori person and denied the whole intermarriage under God. Let no man or woman put asunder what God has joined together. And that's exactly what it proposed in statute. An attack on family values, even though you might not see it that way, from a God-centred perspective it is. Second one, the State-Owned Enterprise Act. It subverted societal ethics by turning the government departments into secular dictatorships and the rule of money. Instead of there being public servants who were serving the people of New Zealand, they became corporate people busy chasing mammon, the love of money, instead of serving the people. So they're no longer state servants, the so-called public service. It's about making a profit, building up a socialist republic, or whatever it is, socialist state. Next one, and now these aren't necessarily in the chronological order, but they all make sense together. In 1985, the government established the Ministry of Women's Affairs. How is it that we need a Ministry of Women's Affairs? There's no Ministry for Men's Affairs. There's no Ministry for Family Affairs. There's no ministry for upholding and building unity in the country. Separating women through statute is an anti-family matter. God created us, Adam and Eve, men and women together as complementary pairs to fit together and to create from us our unity to create families. To make a Ministry of Women's Affairs is to politicise and separate the idea of women from men. And this has led to all kinds of weird things. It is a collective responsibility which has been broken. And again, how can God endorse or support this sort of thing? 1977 Contraception, Sterilisation and Abortion Act. Kill the unborn. The breakdown of family-centred values. The denial of responsibility for acts of love, acts of conception. A whole range of issues are raised here. What is the Parliament doing getting involved? in people's lives and penetrating its laws into the womb, into the actual meeting of sperm and egg. That is not Parliament's business. That's God's business. And men and women involved in that stand before God to be judged for good or ill. So the next part, 1986 Homosexual Law Reform Bill. The politicisation of private immorality. Whatever homosexuals or lesbians or people do together is their private business. It's not a political matter. It's their private conscience and their private karma and their private consequence. Why should the rest of us accept this and let it be politicised and turn into collective responsibility? It's not my responsibility what homosexuals want to do. That's their business. They take the consequences of that. It's not yours either. So how is it that we now have laws which are penetrating into people's bedrooms, into their private affairs? The 2003 Prostitution Reform Act, the politicisation of personal immorality, allowing the commercialisation of sex to be sanctioned by the state instead of being left where it always was, over there, where people doing these things are doing it on their own behalf, not on behalf of the rest of us, and not as a taxable activity. So the morality legislating permissiveness, the state invasion of the personal life, has become integral with the government process of New Zealand. And we've all been part of it. How can God endorse this? How can the God of love, of the family world, everyone's going, how can the God of love allow war? For goodness sake, this sort of breakdown demonstrates that it's nothing to do with God and everything to do with human misbehaviour. 2019, the End of Life Choice Act, anti-life state invasion of private responsibility, advocating that we snuff out the elderly people. This is again not a matter for the state to interfere. If people are in terrible pain and their lives have been extended by medical technology, there is a choice element there, but that's a private matter. It's not a matter for the state to be involved. So we again have the breakdown of Christian civil society and mores, which are values and moral principles. We have, as a consequence of this, the exposure of innocent children of the next generation to state-sanctioned perversions. As a consequence of this, a lot of us have noticed that the Parliament and the people who go into the Parliament and the inner circle of the government, many of them are sexual deviants whose private behaviour doesn't fit someone who's in public office, who's meant to be representing a society which is based on family, and we are seeking to build a future for our children, a united or unified country of all the different folk here getting along together. This kind of constant and consistent legislature and push from vested interests who get and convince the public, the people, to go along with it is a crime. It's a moral crime. So we've got an incremental advance in the cultural war against personal integrity and family unity, which trashes our future. And of course there's big attempts to redefine the past, as make out as if people in the past hated all these things. Honestly, personal responsibility, personal matters belong with individual people. They are not to be legislated by politicians who are here today and gone tomorrow, and the consequences of their statutes affect us all collectively. There's a collective shame here. No wonder we can't be God's own. No wonder it's no longer God's own country that God, Heavenly Father, the Creator, has had to turn his face away from a people who would violate his instructions, there's all this, we've got to save the planet and all this and that, global warming and environmental this and carbon footprint that. What about your moral footprint? What about your moral spiritual output. The churches are nowhere to be seen in this game, unfortunately. There are one or two brave members, Family First comes to mind, but mostly they're out to lunch because they're complicit with this kind of collective immorality. And that is a tragedy which has been visited on our country, and this constant harping on the Treaty of Waitangi, shows you that this is the linchpin, the hinge, the beginning from which the rot started with a lie. I'm not saying that everything beforehand was perfect and swimming, but it was acceptable to God as a foundation on which a better culture could be erected. This collectively is not a better country, a better culture. You can say, oh, it's all about love. It's not about love. It's about immoral behaviour. Love is something very different. Love grows in the family. So this is not a family-centred, love-based project. And the politicians are not in the business of love anyway. They're in the business of power, influence, and playing games with people's money. Let's get back to the basics. This can be reformed, this can be turned around. That's the subject of another matter. I had to explain to you, whatever happened to God's own country, we drove God away by committing collective immoral behaviour and allowing others to dictate to us those terms. So we've been losing the cultural war against personal integrity and family unity instead of building it up. I leave that with you to figure out the maths of this, because it all adds up very simply to one conclusion. Thank you.